Reclaiming Timeless Ways, another episode. Glad you're joining us. Mike Traster, Simon Fuller. Mike, kind of an interesting show today when you proposed this to me. I really liked where your head was at in preparing for this show, in the sense that you've got so much knowledge that you've given us over these shows and are going to in the future, and you have a lot of thoughts, and a lot of these thoughts come from things that you've read, life experiences that you've had, and ultimately today's almost, I don't know if we want to call it Mike's top books, but certainly amongst the top pieces of literature that you've read that have impacted you, and you're just going to share with our audience kind of what they are and what they're about, and if it's fitting, one of these titles is fitting for something going on in your world, go grab it. You're saying it was worth the read to you.
Oh, absolutely. Before the wreck, I read a tremendous amount.
Right.
After the wreck, not so much.
Right.
But since then, I've listened to, on a very lazy year, 20 books a year, and on a busy year, 50 to 100.
Okay.
So easily been through 1,000 or more books in my life.
Sure.
And sometimes if a book really impresses me, I might listen to it 3 or 4 or 5 times.
Sure.
And really get every little last bit of essence out of it. So, you see people struggling with things, and or somebody they love is struggling with something.
Right.
And they're sitting there and they're thinking, this is huge and I'm powerless. There's a mountain of cement and I've got a toothpick. I can't move it.
Sure.
So the question is can I do something instead of nothing, right? So the first book that I wrote down is a book called An Anatomy of an Illness, and it's written by Norman Cousins, and he was a writer. I think he wrote for one of the periodicals back east, and he got very sick. He had, I believe it was an autoimmune disease that was considered potentially terminal, and he was not given a good prognosis at all. And so he started doing some research, and because I guess research was just in his genes, so to speak. And he stumbled across the relationship between humor and immunity, appropriate immunity. And he started reading more about this, and it really inspired him. So he went out and he collected a bunch of movies that were funny for him.
Right.
And he started watching them a lot, and he got better instead of got dead. And now, does that mean everybody gets better instead of dies? No, it doesn't mean. That's not a promise, but it means he had a tool, to chip away at that cement.
Right.
And for him, it made an extraordinary difference. Now, what were the other factors? Environment, eating, heredity, exercise, other things we don't know about? Sure, but it made a difference for him. So Anatomy of an Illness. Second book is On Democracy, and it was written by Thomas Jefferson a couple of 100 years ago when they were first setting out to create a country that had rid itself of bureaucrats and entitled tyrants. So he wrote about what the fundamental principles of freedom were in a republic, because we're not technically a democracy.
Sure.
And why those principles were necessary, and how people were always going to abuse those things, both within government and outside.
Sure.
And we see that continuing. On Democracy. Third one, it's a big fat book. You can pick up a used copy of it or a new one on Amazon for between $5 and $25. It's called The Encyclopedia of Natural Medicine. It's written by a man who his colleagues call Wonder Boy, Michael Murray, and it was co-authored by Joe Pizzorno. They're two naturopathic doctors, and they were instructors, and Pizzorno was the president of John Bastyr School of Naturopathic Medicine in Seattle. It's a brilliant book, and it covers a lot of topics, and it gets rewritten about every 2 or 3 years.
Sure.
So it's always updated, but even if you find one that's 25 years old and dog-eared, it's still a treasure.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want in your armament of ideas, if you want information on natural healing, this is a good one. And he's a very skillful man. Their prerequisites for that school are the same as for med school. So they're very, very, very focused on science. The fourth one is a book on survival, and it's called the SAS Survival Manual. It's written by a man named John Wiseman. I've been through it twice. It's a whole bunch. There's two versions. There's a little one. After you read it, you shouldn't worry so much about survival because you'll be blind. And so you have to get a seeing eye survival dog. So get the bigger one. But it's the SAS Survival Manual. It's a brilliantly written book. And John Wiseman was an SAS soldier in the British military and very, very accomplished. Another one is a book on ethics in life and in medicine. It's called The Road Not Taken by a doctor named M. Scott Peck. So it's about, all those challenges.
Right.
And he wrote very well. He was
a lot of what we talk about in this show, in a nut, kind of.
Absolutely.
I mean, the theme,
Absolutely.
It boils down to ethics in all of our lives.
Right.
The Road Not Taken. That seems like a good book that I might enjoy reading.
Oh, it's a wonderful book. Tao Te Ching. Tao means the way, Te of, and Ching life. And it was written by a mystic and philosopher, I believe, from China, very long, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And it was the basis of what's called Taoism, which is kind of a religion, or a philosophy, based on the fact that we are in nature. We're not next to nature. We're a part of nature,
Sure.
And then it's like, how do you relate to yourself, the world, your fellow human beings, animals? How do you use power, and how do you not use it? And the results of doing those things poorly or well.
Right.
Next book, it's a brilliant book. The one that I'm most fond of, there's a number of versions, was written by a lady named Jane English. And she's a physicist. She's a doc level physicist.
So very intelligent.
Oh boy, is she ever. And we exchanged a note a couple times. I think she did her doctoral work up in Wisconsin, but she's also an incredible photographer. So if you see Jane English in the Tao Te Ching, it's a gorgeous book. There's 82 one-page sayings, and there's a picture next to each one, and I consider the book a treasure.
Yeah.
And I've given away maybe 8-10 copies in my life. How to Listen to God is it's a book about how to listen to God inside of yourself by Charles Stanley, who's a well-known pastor and preacher. It's a wonderful book. Next one is Yoga in 28 Days by Richard Hittleman. Basic yoga postures to increase your flexibility, right? And it's just very simple. It talks about what we were talking about, little steps, right? The Green Pharmacy is written by James Duke, and it's a book about plant medicine. Duke was kind of a bit of a stiff. He was a member of the scientific community. He had a doctorate. I don't remember if it was in botany or not, but he was taking some trips to Central or South America, and the local people down there were meeting him and saying, "You got to come and see this guy that works with plants." And I think he worked for like the Food and Drug Administration or one of those big bureaucracies.
Kind of probably naysaying the idea of plant medicine.
Nah, we're scientists, screw off. And go away, kid, you bother me. Anyway, they finally convinced him to come visit some guy, and the guy showed him some of the work he was doing, and he was like, this stuff works. So he became interested. The hook was set. And one little thing at a time, reality reeled him in. Nobody sold him a bill of goods.
Right.
He didn't get in a multi-level marketing con guy. This was like nature. These people had experienced how there were gifts from nature, and obviously nature is created.
Right.
It didn't happen by accident. So the Green Pharmacy, Gestalt Therapy Verbatim was a book written by a psychotherapist named Fritz Perls, who was kind of a wild man. And anyway, it was just about dreams and therapy. And one of the things he talked about was 2 chairs. So in 2 chairs, like, let's say the therapist is sitting there and you're there, and there's an empty chair here, so you're yourself. So he says, well, what do you want to say to your uncle? So you say something to your uncle, and then he says, okay, get up, get in the other chair, become your uncle. Be him completely. What will he say? And so you take on his essence, and then you go back and forth. So this was part of what he also talked about dreams, and one of Pearl's ideas was that every aspect of a dream is a part of yourself. It's a reflection of you. Is that true? Absolutely. I doubt it. But is it true sometimes? Probably.
Yeah.
You know, but he was a brilliant guy, and you know, he broke down some barriers. Think on These Things was a book of it was a book of Indian philosophy about how we use our mind, and it was written by a man named Krishnamurti with a K. I think Krishnamurti, and so he used a lot of the simple philosophies that came out of the Indian and Hindu culture about how we observe things around ourselves, and do we internalize them and make ourselves enraged and powerless, or do we simply observe them and rise above them, see them moving by, but not get caught up by them? Right. You know, it's like if you don't like a tiger, you don't jump in the cage and tell it. Right? So, New Think was a book by Edward de Bono. There's 2 books here by him. One is New Think, one is 6 Thinking Hats. So New Think was a book about the 2 different ways that we process information when we're dealing with troubles, right?
Sure.
And he said, one is you acknowledge that there's a problem, and you use that acknowledgement as part of the foundation of what you need to search for to fix it, right? And the other one is you stay focused on the problem.
Right.
Well, if you stay focused on the problem, you're going to have a much harder time finding a solution. Right. So that was the one. The other one was called the 6 Thinking Hats. And the 6 Thinking Hats is about groups of people who do problem solving. So like if you have an engineering group, you're the guy that proposed the idea. And then you have these 4 or 5 other people, and they each have a set role. One person is like the butt kiss, so they agree with everything you say, right?
Right.
And the other person is like your enemy almost, and they're nipping at your heel and telling you, ripping your ideas to shreds. Then there's a third person that's a creative person, and they say, well, yeah, you know, I think this might be a good idea, but here's how you want to tweak it to make it better. So they might look at efficiency or safety or cost or whatever. And then there's a timekeeper. So each of these people has to be true to their role. They can't hold back, right? Or have an unspoken agenda. Their agenda has to be the role they're given. And the result is way better decision making in groups. So the 6 Thinking Hats, brilliantly written book. The next one is written by Jean Carper, who wrote, maybe for the New York Times. She was like a health editor, as I recall. There's 100 ways to prevent or slow down Alzheimer's, or something very similar to that. Fine book, really good. And more stuff has been done since then. And just in terms of practicality, Reader's Digest wrote a book on, it's called The Complete Home Repair Manual, just how to do things. So you're not becoming a victim of, you know, the repair guy who's going to charge you 50, 60, whatever.
And even if the repair guy is a good one, you know, one of those
very honest,
right? That doesn't mean, the point is, you know, okay, so you can use him for components that maybe you're not comfortable with, but how much can you do to expand your budget, because you can do some of your own? Can I paint a wall?
Right.
Yeah. Could I pay somebody else to? Yeah. But If I pay somebody else to, it costs twice as much. So
Right.
now I paint it, save half the money, and I've got another half jump start on another project.
You're
you
still
know?
out of budget.
Yeah.
You haven't touched it yet.
Right.
Right.
And there are just a multitude of things that it was funny. I really can get on board with that mindset because I did not grow up in a family of hands-on, you know.
Okay.
And when my wife took on a business adventure, and we basically got so much money to work with here, and there was a lot more to do than the money allowed, said, well, either we A, don't do it, or B, we figure it out. And we
Right.
figured out a lot of things with some help, some people, some guidance, some knowledge, and didn't even do a half bad job, I don't think. It hasn't caved in. So it is funny when you put your mind to something and have a little guidance like
Right.
this book would provide you, you'd be amazed at what you can accomplish and how much money you can save.
I've given away 2 or 3 copies. One of the things that I do as part of my way of trying to be of some value to other people is I will buy books that I've read or that look interesting, and I'll find the person for the book.
Right.
I think I gave you a book or 2. The Relaxation Response, a book about meditation from the viewpoint of a physician. His name is Benson. It's a good book. The Art of Self-Rescue. This was written by an old friend of mine many years ago, John Kiley. He had a doctorate in clinical philosophy. And clinical philosophy is kind of like, it's sort of like a philosophical approach to logic as it pertains to thinking about reality. So you think yourself out of trouble, not into it.
Right.
Right? And I mean, obviously that's an he was an interesting guy, very bright, super bright. So he had this background in clinical philosophy, and he had a ministerial training, and then he went to South America and went through med school. So he was a bright guy. He's probably in his late 80s now. I think he's still around, but I've lost touch with him. But it's a great book, and it's about somebody who's skiing, and they go over this bump, and they fly up in the air, and they hit this huge snowbank, and they wind up hanging stuck in the snow, upside down, suspended by their skis. And they fall into this wild, insane, lethal panic.
Sure.
And then they have a conversation with themselves about what the 2 outcomes can be.
Right.
All right? And they know that if they continue thinking that way, that they're going to ramp up their body until they become insane and give themselves a heart attack, you know? So how do they deal with that? That's what the book is basically about. It's a great little book. Another one that's simple, you know, plain, just practical. There's a lady named Lorelei Sims, and she wrote a book called The Backyard Blacksmith. It's about making old shovels and hammers and axes and hinges and just hammering iron and forming things. Old world art, you know. And she's good at what she does. Aldous Huxley was a philosophical writer. His wife, Laura Huxley, wrote a book about people who feel like everything that happens to them is personal. And the title, and I have a theory, and that is there's 3 sources. There's good, there's evil, and there's random.
Sure.
Right? So if you're walking through the forest and an old rotted branch falls on you and cuts your head, was the devil up there with a saw, or was it just time the squirrel jumped on it or whatever, and it just finally fell?
Right.
And it was just random, you know? So You Are Not the Target is about how we look at things that happen to us, and the idea of depersonalizing things, that even when people do rotten things, they don't necessarily do them, like if somebody drives by and flips you the bird. They're a stranger, right? They didn't do it to me or you, they just did it to whoever caught their...
That situation, whatever was going on in their world, you happened to be a part of it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so it's a good book. Good.
And I think everyone can really assume.
Oh,
It's just
man.
funny. I heard somebody with a story
Yeah.
about that not long ago, and that's why it made me chuckle a little more.
Okay.
It was going through a line, and
Right.
I won't get too specific because it might give things away. And anyway, he was following the rules, and somebody else wanted in that wasn't following the rules in a vehicle, and he gave him the double, and he's like,
Right.
he just happened to be there. It wasn't because he was saying it to
He was
him.
angry at his boss or his wife.
Whatever,
It was the
but-
next guy in line.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Blink. Blink is written by a guy who's a prolific writer, brilliant, just a kind of a wild man because he looks at the world through a different lens and he sees patterns that are there.
Right,
Not he invents patterns because he's crazy.
right,
He sees what we don't see because we're so busy with things going by that it's a blur. This guy stops and he goes, there's a process going on here. Like all these people that discovered math or biology or astronomy, it was there,
right.
but they stopped and they looked at it and they said, I wonder if those stars are always fixed or if they move in a circle or if they just come and disappear, and they observed.
Right.
Blink, Malcolm Gladwell. It's a book about when you become experienced at something, how you can make a quantum leap of awareness and know if something fits into a good or bad or yes or no category quickly, right? Like doctors sometimes have that, nurses have it, some psychoanalysts have it, mechanics have it, cops have it, parents have it with their kids,
Sure.
right? Blink. And Gladwell's written a whole bunch of books. If you like to read, I would get. He wrote another book called David and Goliath, right? And the basic idea that everybody gets from listening to preaching is that Goliath should have won, but David had God on his side, but he was also extremely lucky, and But one of the things that he said is no, David was actually, he had the advantage. Goliath was at the disadvantage.
Huh.
He was immensely powerful and mean, and David was a skilled fighter. He fought lions and bears to protect his flock.
Sure.
Oh, so he was, see, Goliath had a sword and a spear. This guy had missiles.
Right.
His sling was like a missile launcher. And he could hit that guy in the center of his head.
Interesting.
He was done, right? So everything that we always knew, we thought we knew about it, wasn't true. We're not a bunch of it. Getting well again. Carl Simonton was a physician, and he was an oncologist. And he did a bunch of research and decided that, as we talked about with the kid joking about the head and the body not being connected,
Right.
that the head and the body are connected, and what we think has an immense effect on how we create better wellness, keep it or regain it, to fight illness. And he talked about, one of the visualizations he talked about was a battle. So it could be like Western forces versus the Nazis. And when all the Nazis on the field in your mind's eye were dead, you would create this vortex of water that would flush out all the dead soldiers. And it would just drain out of your heel. And then you would see this beautifully restored vision, right? And then you would go to this place that was perfect, a place of perfection for you.
Right,
Someplace, whatever it was, the side of a hill, next to a stream, it doesn't, a book room, your perfection, right? And people that did this meditation regularly, they outlived their prognosis for a life expectancy by 40%. They did everything standard, meds, treatment,
Right,
surgery,
right.
radiation, and then they did the visualization, and they lived 40% longer than they were expected to.
Wow.
Yeah, extraordinary. Simonton had a tragic death. He choked, and he passed away a number of years ago. And his wife continues his work. She has a center out in California called the Simonton Center, and I call her up every now and then and encourage her. I tell her I'm inspired by the work that she does and that he did. So I always want to tell her that. And I don't think they're like a huge money organization. I think they kind of just get by,
Right.
maybe a little more than that, but not. The next book is called Magister Ludi, and it was The Master of the Glass Bead Game. It was written by Herman Hesse, and it was about a system of elite education in Europe. And it's probably a metaphor, you know, to something real, and about this kid that goes through this whole thing. And he's uniquely brilliant, so he rises up and up this pyramid until he becomes more and more and more elite, till he becomes the master of this game. And it destroys him because he developed everything in this but his heart.
Sure.
So he was empty. He was empty. And the process ruined him. So that's my list of books for today. And I would think that for most people, one or two of those would be a treasure.
Yeah, and that's the key, Mike. What I kind of said at the beginning, it's a unique show. It's not on one specific topic or thought.
No.
It's a grouping of books that you've enjoyed.
Oh, yeah.
You gave a little synopsis of what they are.
Right.
If there's one that sounded interesting to you or somebody that you know, based on your interests or something you're going through right now, hopefully you'll check one out and find that value in it, as you have, Mike.
Yeah. And I'm big fan of Symington's work because I used to train people to do that. And then, of course, I thought I got a pass. Then I wound up with a tumor of my own. And I used that work for myself with
Sure.
my therapy 12 years ago. And good outcome, you know. Thank God. Brilliant surgeon. Somebody told me it was an act of God that I got this surgeon. It was amazing. But I consider these books treasures,
Yeah.
you know. And I think that probably each person that listen will find a treasure, gold
Somewhere in there.
in one of them,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
Definitely. So that's that.
All right, well, thanks for joining us today for this edition of Reclaiming Timeless Ways. Have a great day.
Take care.